All right, so we only got one game left, Steven. So the suspense is gone. Utah at Florida. That's your number one, and for good reason. What can you tell us about Utah?
Man, I think the first thing is I haven't been able to get a good kind of grasp on this game all off season. And I think the folks at the sports books are kind of doing the same. It's been like a 1 to 2 to 3 point spread that's just been bouncing around. But I think Utah, when you look at the Pac-12, they are the team to beat. They started 1-2 last season. They switched to Cameron Rising at quarterback, Tavion Thomas at running back, and they went on a run, eventually won the Pac-12, made it to the Rose Bowl. They are definitely a contender to be in the playoff this year. They bring back a lot of that team from last year, very veteran. I think Kyle Whittingham, the head coach there, every 3 to 4 years they have a team that is very capable. Once they get those guys in the program and develop, of making a run like this. They do have some turnover along the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They lost Devin Lloyd, the standout linebacker, to the NFL. But Utah is one of those teams. They're just kind of a plug and play. You just assume that they're going to figure things out: offensive line, defensive line, linebacker. So I don't know that those groups are necessarily a concern. They like to play physical, and I think that's what makes this matchup interesting. Is they're not a kind of throw it around 40, 50 times a game kind of team. They are going to come in and try to impose their physicality on Florida.
Now, this is something that I was asked to ask you, though, Steven. Is it Utah? Are they that elite? Because you're seeing some playoff predictions for the Utes, or is it more of a factor of being a really good team that has an easier path in the Pac-12? How would you answer that one?
I think they're in that second tier of college football. I think, if you tier off Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, they're in that second tier with the Clemsons and Texas A&Ms. I don't On a neutral field, I think they would probably be underdogs to teams like Texas A&M and Clemson. But I think to your point, the path is there. And I think go back to last year was not a great year at all for the Pac-12. I mean, USC was terrible and Washington had a losing record. So some of your usual suspects were not as good. I think this year's team with the pieces that they have coming back, Cameron Rising stepping up at quarterback, like they could get to 12-1. This is one of the tougher obstacles on their schedule. So I guess to hedge a little bit, I don't think that they're necessarily better than teams like Clemson or A&M. But I think when you study the path and you study the potential to be that number 4 team, especially when those of us who are trying to make picks this offseason are trying to figure out, is it going to be, there's really just not a clear team. They have a good opportunity to do so, I think, this year.
Now, I've heard a lot of good things about Utah's tight ends. Will this be the best tight ends Florida sees until, of course, they see Georgia?
Yeah, this is a good group of tight ends. Brant Keithy is on our All America team, and I think he's kind of a unique player that they could use him in sort of some all purpose ways. Kincaid, the other tight end, too. They really have both of these guys great at blocking. Andy Ludwig is their offensive coordinator. You may remember him when he was at Vanderbilt. He's done a lot of similar things from a style standpoint offensively with the way they use the tight ends and of course Cameron Rising on the way they move the pocket with him. So yeah, this is a really good group of tight ends for Utah. The one question that I have in this game is receivers. They did not push the ball downfield a lot last year with their receivers. Part of it was Cameron Rising, the quarterback, had a shoulder injury in 2020. I don't know if he was necessarily 100%. They lost Britton Covey, who was sort of their all-purpose best weapon at receiver this year. So I think if when you watch this game on Saturday, I think that is a question: is what receivers of Utah can step up, especially if Florida, if you have Jason Marshall, matched up against one of their other guys, you take them away. If you can slow down the tight ends, can you make some of those secondary weapons for Utah beat you?
I'm glad you mentioned Andy Ludwig because I thought he did a terrific job when he was at Vanderbilt. And kind of when he left, that was the beginning of the end for Derek Mason. Who do you think has got the edge in this one, Andy Ludwig or Florida's new defensive coordinator Patrick Toney? With when you consider maybe it's not fair, but hey, this is how it is. Ludwig, totally familiar with his personnel and who he can count on, whereas it's I don't want to call it a guessing game at Florida, but they're going to have to be learning on the fly, so to speak.
It's a great question. I think I would rather be Andy Ludwig on Saturday night because if you have an experienced quarterback going on the road, you have a depth chart at running back you feel good about. This is probably one of the deeper running backs, groups of running backs in college football. And we've mentioned the tight ends, and I think Utah is going to be fine along the offensive line. I do like Patrick Toney, the defensive coordinator at Florida. He did a lot of good things with Louisiana's defense. I think in time, I think Florida's defense will get there. But I think going into the season, if I'm trying to pick a coordinator and trying to pick a side, if you've got a proven quarterback and you've got some proven pieces like Utah, I think that's where I'd rather be.
Now, is it safe to assume Utah will have an edge on special teams? Because I'm looking at their stats. Number 6 in the country in punt returns, number 13 in the country in kick returns last season. Has that been a solid unit for Utah?
Usually they are very good on special teams. One problem is they lost Britton Covey, who was good at returns for Utah the last couple of years. He's now in the NFL, so they will miss him. They usually do a good job of finding kickers and punters and specialists. So it's usually been a strength for Utah. But without Covey, I think that is a fair question of whether or not they can sell that same level of effectiveness over the course of the season.
All right, one final question for you, Stevens. Similar to Cincinnati, Arkansas. Yes, Utah, they're getting the hype, but have they ever been in an environment like they're going to see Saturday night? Not only the hostile fans and coming all the way across the country, but that heat and humidity is. I feel like that has got to be a difference maker in this game. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think if I'm Florida, like checking the weather, making sure it's like 90 degrees and 70% humidity, like make it as swampy as you can get it on Saturday night for Utah, which you know it's a different type of environment, like you said. I mean, it's one thing to go play on the road at Washington State or USC or some of the other venues in the Pac-12. But if you go to on the road to play a team like Florida, the first game of Billy Napier's tenure, not to mention just all of the unknown and all the uncertainty that Florida has. I mean, the element of surprise, like what are they going to look like? So that would worry me if I'm Utah. I think you look at the spread and like we talked about, the fact that it's been around one or two, I think kind of speaks to the toss up nature of this game.